day, learners! Welcome back to my channel. For today's lesson, I will be discussing about heredity, particularly the Mendelian genetics. Kung bago lang kayo sa aking channel, don't forget to like, share, and also subscribe para ma-update kayo ng ating mga bagong lesson. Our learning objectives for this lesson: describe the Mendelian Principles of inheritance by analyzing Mendel's experiment. Identify the genotypic and phenotypic ratios of offspring in the standard monohybrid. And lastly, solve problems involving Mendelian genetics. Alright, so let's start the lesson. Sit back, relax, and enjoy learning. Genes, genetics, heredity, recessive, dominant, love dominance, alleles, and love segregation are some of the words that you might be encounter as we go along in our lesson. So our topic for today is about genetics, particularly the Mendelian genetics. So what is genetics? Genetics is the scientific study of heredity and variation. What about heredity? Heredity is a process or study of how traits are passed on from parents to offspring. Kulot, matangos at pango, matangkad at pandak, unat ang buhok, kayumanggi at maputi, singkit at hindi singkit. These are the common and visible traits na pwede nating mamana or makuha mula sa ating mga magulang. So ano nga ba yung traits? Traits? Ito yung mga characteristics or katangian na pwedeng mamana mula sa ating mga magulang. Just like the pictures that show in your screen. Technically, we are a product of our own parents. So, 23 chromosomes from our father and 23 chromosomes from our mother contains different types of traits na pwedeng maipasa sa atin na kanilang mga offspring. So, paano nga ba nagsimula ang genetics? The scientific study of heredity was started with the experiment of Gregor Johann Mendel. Gregor Johann Mendel is an Augustinian monk who loves both science and math and considered as the father of genetics because he introduced heredity as the biological process which is responsible for the transmission of traits from one generation to another generation. So his experiment was started using a garden pea. He bred different varieties of garden peas and cross-pollinated flowers that had different forms of traits. So what is a garden pea? A garden pea has a scientific name of Pisum sativum. The seeds are a good source of protein and dietary fiber. It is one of the important plants in the history of science because Mendel used this plant as a subject in studying genetics. Using pea plant, Mendel observed these 7 traits. The traits are seed shape, seed color, pod shape, pod color, flower color or seed coat color, flower location, and plant size. Mula sa 7 traits na kanyang na-observe, each of that trait has 2 possible traits pa ang kanyang na-observe. So, halimbawa sa seed shape, meron siyang na-observe na round at wrinkled. For seed color, we have yellow and green. For pod shape, we have inflated and constricted. For pod color, we have green and yellow. For flower color, we have purple and white. Sometimes it is called a seed coat color. We have colored and white. For flower location, we have axial and terminal. And lastly, For plant size, we have tall and short. Sometimes it is called as dwarf. Sa dinami-dami ng mga halaman, bakit naisip ni Mendel na gamitin ang garden pea? The garden pea is an ideal subject in the study of genetics because, number 1, presence of observable traits with contrasting forms, meaning specific characteristics of an organism such as color and height. The second one, produces many offspring in one cross, short life cycle, and lastly, is in manipulating pollination such as cross-pollination. So what did he do? Mendel conducted his experiment on garden peas using 3 steps. Production of pure breeding strains of pea plant, the crossing of 2 different varieties of pure breeding strains, and the crossing of F1 generations. Isa sa mga ginawa ni Mendel ay ang pag-produce ng pure breed plant. Dahil isa sa mga characteristics ng pea plant ay ang pag-self-fertilize. Once na nag-produce ito ng mga offspring through self-pollination, it will show the 7 traits that I mentioned earlier. Itong mga pure breed plant na to, na ipapasa nito yung mga certain phenotypic traits. Pag sinabing phenotypic traits, ito yung mga observable traits kagaya ng color and height into many generations. Pagkatapos mag-produce ni Mendel ng pure breed, isa sa mga ginawa niya ay pinag-cross-pollinate ang dalawang pea plant with contrasting traits. Ibig sabihin, yung dalawang pure breed plant na may magkaibang traits, pinag-cross-pollinate niya ito. Ang tawag sa generation ng dalawang pure breed plant or pure breed parents ay parental or P1 generations. Take a look of the picture that show in your screen. So, meron tayo dito dalawang pure breed plant or parent plant na homozygous yellow and homozygous green. Kung mapapansin ninyo, homo means one or same, pero kung titingnan ninyo yung dalawang parent plant, magkaiba sila in terms of color. Once na nag-cross-pollinate na to, it will produce a heterozygous offspring that is called as first filial generation or F1 generation. So, this will be the result of Mendel's crosses between pure breeding pea plant. So, dito, involve ang dalawang parent na pure breed plant na magpo-produce ng offspring na tinatawag na first filial generation. Una dito yung seed shape. Sa seed shape, meron tayong round and wrinkled at ang nabuo ay round. In terms of seed color, we have green and yellow at ang na-produce naman ay yellow. In terms of seed coat color, we have colored and white and the result is colored. Pagdating naman sa pod shape, meron tayong inflated at constricted at ang result nito ay inflated. In terms of pod color, we have green and yellow and the result is green. In terms of flower position, meron tayong axial and terminal at ang result nito ay axial. And lastly, in terms of stem length, we have long and short and the result is long. This offspring or first filial generation, also known as hybrid or cross. Pagkatapos mag-cross, Mendel ng dalawang pure breed parent plant that resulted a heterozygous offspring which is called as the first filial generation or F1 generation. From F1 generation offspring, pinag-cross niya ulit ito through the process of self-pollination that resulted another set of offspring which is now called as the F2 generation or second filial generation. Take a look of the picture. As you observe, may mga characteristics ang lumabas sa second filial generation na hindi visible or hindi express or hindi nakita sa first filial generation. Results of Mendel's crosses between hybrid plants. So dito, same pa din naman yung mga characteristics na tiningnan ni Mendel gaya ng sa P1 at F1 generation. Pero dito, hybrid or the first filial generation offspring ang kanyang ginamit. That resulted the F2 generation, and in F2 generation, two traits are visible. In terms of seed shape, yung hybrid niya ay round, yung result F2 generation niya ay round and wrinkled. In terms of seed color, yellow, the result would be green and yellow. Sa seed coat color, we have colored, the result would be colored and white. In terms of pod shape, we have inflated, the result will be inflated and constricted. In terms of pod color, meron tayong green. The result would be green and yellow. In flower position, we have axial. The result would be axial and terminal. In terms of stem length or height, we have long. The result would be long and short. Mendel formulated an hypothesis that there is a factor that controls the appearance of plant. Based on the outcomes of Mendel's experiment, he proposed the following laws that led to the formation of what is now known as Mendelian Principles of Genetics. So we have 4 Mendelian Principles. The first one is the rule of unit factor in pair, principles of dominance, law of segregation, and law of independent assortment. So the first one is the rule of unit factors in pair. This is the genetic characters are controlled by unit factors that exist in pairs in individual organism. The unit factor that we know now is the genes. Genes are sections of chromosomes that code for a trait. The different form of genes are called alleles, or other term is traits. We have here the dominant allele and the recessive allele. So during that time, hindi pa alam kung ano ang tawag doon sa factor na nakakaapekto sa appearance ng offspring. So, dahil sa F2 generation, since may dalawang alternative traits, definitely, meron at merong nagko-control dito sa pair of genes. Ang tawag doon sa pair of genes na yon ay alleles. So, gaya ng nasabi ko, may dalawang uri na tayo ng alleles. Meron tayong dominant allele at recessive alleles. So, dominant allele is a form of gene that is fully expressed when two alleles are present. Ito yung dominante. Pag sinabi naman na recessive allele, it is a form of gene that is not expressed when paired to a dominant allele. The second one is the principle of dominance. Principle of dominance states that the dominant allele or trait is expressed and the recessive allele can be hidden. So, ibig sabihin, hanggat present ang dominant allele, laging makikita ito. But, it doesn't mean the recessive allele ay hindi na makikita. It can be possible to be expressed sa mga susunod pa na generation. So, take a look of this table. In the production of the first filial generation offspring, may dalawang pure breed parent na involved. Each of the parent consists of different characteristics that can be categorized as dominant and recessive. So, for the seed shape, round as dominant and wrinkled for recessive. For the seed color, we have green as dominant and yellow as recessive. For seed coat color, we have colored as dominant and white as recessive. For pod shape, we have inflated as dominant and constricted as recessive. For pod color, green as dominant and yellow as recessive. For flower position, we have axial for dominant and terminal as recessive. For stem length or height, we have long as dominant and short as recessive. As you observe in the first filial generation, all the offspring shows the dominant traits. In the study of genetics, symbols are used to represent individuals. Dominant alleles are represented by capital letters, while recessive alleles are represented by small letters. Since we're talking about here the genes, genes are always in pair. Definitely, the letters are also in pair. So here, in terms of seed color, green, and yellow, the result would be yellow. So the dominant allele here is the yellow, while the recessive allele is green. Homozygous dominant, homozygous recessive, and heterozygous. Homozygous dominant here consists of the same letters, which is both capital. Homozygous recessive is both small letters, while in heterozygous, it consists of one capital letter and one small letter. The third one is the law of segregation. Law of segregation states that the pair of genes segregates and separates during meiosis. Take a look of the picture. So in this picture, it consists of 3 pairs of chromosomes. So during meiosis, the 2 copies of each gene separate and end up in different gametes containing different traits. So here's the example of gametes that represents the dominant trait, which is yellow color. We have the capital Y and the recessive trait, which represents the green color with the symbol of small letter y. So, paghihiwalayin lang natin yan para makita natin mamaya sa process ng gametogenesis. In the process of gametogenesis, ito yung kanina, we have the capital Y and small letter y. So, pag pinaghiwalay mo yan, it will represent capital Y and small letter y. Once na pinagsama mo yan, it will produce a heterozygous gametes that contains a capital and the small letter y, which represents the dominant and the recessive trait. Gametogenesis is the process of producing gametes. Sa lalaki, tinatawag ito na spermatogenesis or production of sperm cell. Sa babae, tinatawag naman ito na oogenesis or production of matured egg cell. So, sa process na ito, malalaman natin kung ano ang genotype or the resulted combination of gametes that symbolizes the letters, and phenotype, which is the observable traits like color. Phenotype is the observable expression of the trait. Ito yung nakikita natin na mga characteristics or traits kagaya ng kulay at height, while genotype is the factor or genes inside the nucleus of the cell. Ito yung kagaya kanina na nakita natin na nire-represent ng letters. To express the genotype, meron tayong homozygous and heterozygous. Homozygous, these are the 2 alleles for a gene pair that are identical. Heterozygous naman, ito yung 2 alleles for a particular trait that are different. So, examples ng genotype and phenotype in terms of color. So, yung una, capital Y, small letter y, the phenotype is still yellow. Kung matatandaan natin sa rule of unit factor, the dominant allele, as long as present si dominant allele or yung capital Y, the color is still dominant. The other one, parehas na small letter y. the color produced would be green. So this is now called as homozygous recessive. Why is it recessive? Recessive always symbolizes with small letters. Homozygous dahil parehas na small letters ang kanyang alleles. The next one is both capital Y. The phenotype here is yellow. So it is now called as homozygous dominant yellow. In the first example, it is called as dominant, but it is still categorized as heterozygous. Scientists use a tool to make predictions about genetics. It is called as Punnett Square. A Punnett Square is a grid for organizing genetic information. A Punnett Square shows the probability, not the actual result, of the traits of an organism. So this is the actual sample of the Punnett Square. Actually, simple pa lang ito kasi papakita ko lang dito yung simple and kaunti pa lang ng mga traits na i-distribute. The purpose of this Punnett Square is for you to be able to see the probability of the traits that is being passed on the offspring. So example of the traits, we have here a heterozygous yellow from the male and heterozygous yellow from the female. So what are we going to do? We have to distribute this capital Y and small letter y for the male and capital Y, small letter y for the female. Actually, kahit pagbaliktarin mo yan, wala namang problema. Kasi ang titingnan natin dito, yung result sa loob ng box. Ano yung magiging result nito? Ano-anong mga traits ang makikita kapag pinag-cross natin yung dalawang traits galing sa parent organism. So, ipag-cross out natin yung traits ng male at female. So, capital Y and capital Y, the result would be capital Y and capital Y. Small letter y and capital Y, the result would be capital Y and small letter y. So, dito, bakit nauna yung capital Y kesa sa small letter y? Tatandaan natin that the dominant trait is always written first than the recessive traits. Una, para hindi kayo malito. Pangalawa, para ma-identify nyo dito kung alin dito yung dominant allele and recessive allele. The next one is capital Y, small letter y. The result is capital Y, small letter y. The other one is small letter y, small letter y. The result is both small letter y. On this result, kukunin natin dito yung genotypic ratio. So, dito, meron tayong 25% homozygous dominant. Meron tayong 50% heterozygous and 25% recessive. So, ang kalalabasan dyan in terms of ratio is 1:2:1. Isa ang nakakuha ng purong capital, dalawa ang nakakuha ng heterozygous o yung may isang capital at isang small, at isa naman ang nakakuha ng may parehas na small letter. The other one is the phenotypic ratio. So, para makuha natin ang phenotypic ratio, dapat alam natin yung definition nito. Pag sinabing phenotypic or phenotype, it refers to the visible traits or characteristics in the organism. So, dito, 75% of the alleles present in this Punnett Square shows the yellow color and 25% is green. So, the ratio would be 3:1. Bakit 3:1? Meron ditong purong dominant, meron ditong heterozygous, which is also categorized as dominant. Kaya, 75% yung yellow color, which is a dominant color. And 25% green for a total of 100%. And lastly, the law of independent assortment. So, law of independent assortment states that the gene pairs segregate into gametes randomly and independently during meiosis. Halos parehas to nung kanina. the inheritance of one trait is not affected by the inheritance of another trait. So this is how the traits are distributed in the production of gametes. To check your understanding, it's quiz time. So all you need to do is to get the genotypic and phenotypic ratio of the following traits. So that's all our lesson for this day. So thank you, grade 8 student. I hope you learned something. If you want more videos to upload, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and turn on the bell for more updates in our science class.